The year is 1942. You hear the ground shake beneath your boots. Out of the smoke, a steel beast crawls forward, its cannon locked on you, its armor glinting under the sun. This wasn't just a machine, it was the iron fist of Hitler's war machine, crushing everything in its path. From the tiny Panzer I to the monstrous Tiger II, every German tank carried a story of innovation, fear, and destruction. But hidden behind the steel were secrets, designs that were rushed into battle, machines that should not have existed, and monsters that could have changed the course of history. Before the world learned to fear German armor, it started with something almost laughably small, the Panzer I. Introduced in the mid-1930s, the Panzer I wasn't even designed to fight in a battle. It was just a teaching tool, so Germany could secretly train tank crews to rebuild its military in defiance of the Treaty of Versailles. Its armor was paper-thin. A heavy machine gun could rip straight through it. Its main guns were nothing more than 2 machine guns, the same kind of gun a soldier could carry in his arms. Against real tanks, the Panzer I was nearly useless. And yet, when the invasion of Poland began in 1939, over 1,000 of these fragile little tanks rolled across the border. Soldiers called them Kisten, the German word for boxes. These were death traps for their crews. With these large numbers and speed, they overwhelmed Poland's outdated defenses. The world had never seen warfare move so fast. Soon, Germany built the Panzer II. It was a little bigger and stronger. Armed with a 20mm cannon, it could finally punch through light vehicles and fortifications. It wasn't a match for the heavier British Matilda or the French Char B1. In head-to-head battles with these tanks, the Panzer II didn't stand a chance. However, the secret that made these tanks deadly is that they weren't meant to fight fair. Germany had a weapon more powerful than any single tank. Blitzkrieg, radios in every vehicle and fast-moving columns, was the basis for a strategy built on shock and speed. The Panzer I and II weren't war winners on their own, but as part of a group, they sliced through Poland, Norway, Belgium, and France like a knife through butter. These toys were dismissed by their enemies, but became the stepping stones that led to the real monsters yet to come. By 1940, Germany knew the Panzer I and II couldn't carry the war much further. They were fragile, undergunned, and quickly becoming obsolete. That's when the backbone of German armor arrived, the Panzer III and Panzer IV. The Panzer III was built for one job, tank versus tank combat. It was equipped with a 37mm gun. This was enough to deal with most early Allied armor. Later versions had a 50mm gun, making it more deadly. With decent armor and mobility, the Panzer III became the standard tank of the German army during the early years of the war. In the invasion of France, thousands of Panzer IIIs led the attack, smashing through Allied lines. But the real surprise was the Panzer IV. It wasn't designed to fight tanks at all. Its role was infantry support, blasting bunkers and soft targets with a short-barreled 75mm gun. But as the war dragged on, the Panzer IV evolved. Engineers upgraded its gun by lengthening its barrel to fire high-velocity rounds that could punch through thick Allied armor. Engineers upgraded its armor multiple times until the Panzer IV became Germany's most versatile and widely produced tank. Between the Panzer III and IV, Germany had a balance, one for fighting tanks, one for supporting infantry. Together they carried blitzkrieg across Europe, from France to North Africa. Rommel's Afrika Korps relied heavily on these machines, dueling British Matildas and Crusaders in running battles across the dunes of the Sahara Desert. In 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union, and their tanks suddenly faced monsters of a different breed, the Soviet T-34. In 1942, the battlefield changed. Germany needed a new weapon that could handle the Soviet T-34. They unveiled a machine so powerful and feared that its very name struck terror into Allied soldiers, the Tiger. The Tiger I was a beast. Its armor was nearly impenetrable from the front. Its main gun, the dreaded 88mm, could destroy an enemy tank from over a mile away. Crews reported being able to pick off targets before the enemy could even fire back. Against the Tiger, the Sherman, the T-34, and even the British Churchill all seemed helpless. But the Tiger had a dark side. It was expensive, difficult to build, and prone to mechanical breakdowns. Its massive weight made it slow and clumsy in rough terrain. Soldiers joked that if a Tiger wasn't destroyed in combat, it might destroy itself by breaking down. Still, whenever one appeared on the battlefield, panic spread. Entire Allied units would call in artillery or airstrikes just to deal with a single Tiger. Then, in 1944, came the Tiger II, the King Tiger, heavier, thicker, deadlier. It carried an even more powerful 88mm gun and armor that made it almost invincible. The King Tiger was the ultimate expression of German tank design. It was a rolling fortress of steel, but like its predecessor, the King Tiger was cursed by its own size. It guzzled fuel Germany no longer had. Its weight shattered bridges, and mechanical problems crippled many before they even reached battle. Fewer than 500 were ever built, yet their reputation grew larger than than life. To face one in combat was to face near certain death. By this stage of the war, German engineers were chasing perfection, but perfection came at a cost and time was running out. The Tiger tanks dominated in duels, but Germany needed something more practical and reliable while still being deadly, and that's when they turned to the Panther. In 1941, when German troops pushed deep into the Soviet Union, they met the unstoppable T-34 Soviet tank. Germany needed an answer to this fast and maneuverable tank that had revolutionary sloped plating that shrugged off shells. The response was the Panther. Introduced in 1943, it was Germany's attempt to combine firepower, speed, and protection into one tank. It mounted a long-barreled 75mm gun that was powerful enough to kill a T-34 or Sherman at long range. Its armor was thick and sloped, copying the very design that made the T-34 so hard to kill. On paper, the Panther was the perfect tank, but perfection came with problems. Early Panthers were rushed into battle at Kursk, the largest tank battle in history. Engines overheated and transmission failed, leaving many Panthers broken down before they even reached the front. Crews abandoned their tanks not from enemy fire, but from mechanical failure. When a Panther was working, it was lethal. Allied crews learned to fear its silhouette across the battlefield. Over 6,000 Panthers were eventually built, making it Germany's second most produced tank. It became the true backbone of German armor later in the war. Sleek, deadly, and respected by friend and foe alike. Some historians call it the best overall tank design of the war. Yet like the Tigers, the Panther was a double-edged sword. Complex to build and costly in resources, it was never produced in the numbers Germany needed. While the Allies churned out Shermans and T-34s by the tens of thousands, Germany's Panthers remained too few to turn the tide. While the Panthers and Tigers fought to dominate the battlefield, there were other German tanks that filled supporting roles. These smaller machines were often overlooked, but they are just as much a part of the story. Some of these smaller machines were borrowed, some improvised, and some were little more than experiments, yet they all left their mark. Take the Panzer 38T. It wasn't even German to begin with, it was Czech. When Hitler's forces occupied Czechoslovakia in 1939, they seized the Czech tank industry and pressed its designs into service. The 38T was small but reliable, and in the early campaigns, it performed better than many German-built machines. In Poland and France, it was a quiet workhorse. By the time of Operation Barbarossa, it was hopelessly outmatched, but its sturdy chassis found a second life. Engineers stripped away its turret and rebuilt it into tank destroyers. The Hetzer was the most widely known. It was compact, low to the ground, and deadly in ambush. It mounted a powerful 75mm gun on a hull so small it could hide behind hedgerows or rubble. Allied tankers learned to fear the Hetzer because they often didn't see it until it fired. Cheap to build, easy to hide, and hard to hit, the Hetzer was one of Germany's most effective late-war weapons. Then there were the assault guns like the WWII. At first glance, it didn't even look like a tank. There was no turret. It just had a low-profile hull with a gun fixed in place. But that simplicity was its strength. The WWII was mass-produced in staggering numbers, over 10,000 built. By the end of the war, it had destroyed more enemy armor than all the Tigers and Panthers combined. Crews would hide them in forests, at crossroads, or in ruined villages, waiting for Allied columns to roll into their sights. In those moments, the WWII became the hunter, not the hunted. And then there were the oddities. As the war turned against Germany, desperation drove its engineers toward extremes. Multi-turreted land battleships appeared on blueprints, designs that were too heavy to move and too costly to build. The most infamous of these monsters was the Maus. Weighing nearly 200 tons, it was the heaviest tank ever constructed. Its armor was so thick that no Allied gun could pierce it. Its main cannon could destroy any target it faced. On paper, it was unstoppable, but in reality it was a failure. Too slow, too heavy, and impossible to fuel. Only 2 prototypes were ever built, and they never reached battle. The Maus became a symbol not of power, but of wasted ambition. It was a machine too big to fight in the real world. These lesser-known designs paint a picture of German armor in decline. From clever efficiency in the Hetzer and WWII to over-engineered excess in the Maus, they show a nation struggling to out-innovate enemies who had already won the war with numbers, resources, and skies filled with bombers. By 1944, German tank design was at its peak, but the war itself was slipping away. The Tigers and Panthers were feared, yes, but they were too few. Each one that rolled off the production line took precious time and resources that Germany no longer had. Meanwhile, the Allies played a different game. In America, factories produced thousands of Shermans, cheap and reliable. In the Soviet Union, T-34s poured off assembly lines by the tens of thousands. For every German tank, the Allies had 5, sometimes 10. And above it all, Allied planes ruled the skies, hunting columns columns of armor before they ever reached the front. German tanks fought fiercely in the deserts of Africa, the forests of Russia, the hedgerows of Normandy, and finally, the ruined streets of Berlin. But no amount of steel could turn back the tide. By 1945, the once unstoppable Panzer divisions were little more than scattered remnants, their fuel gone, their crews exhausted, their machines left burning on the roadside. And yet, their legacy lived on. The Tigers became legends, the Panthers a blueprint for modern design, and even the failures like the Maus became symbols of ambition and desperation. German tanks could not win the war, but they carved themselves into history. But here's the question that lingers. What if Germany had the resources to build more? What if the Maus had been unleashed in numbers, or the Panther perfected years earlier? Would the war's outcome have changed, or was the fall of the Panzer inevitable from the start?